It's your man Timmhotep representing for Okayplayer today, and we have a very esteemed guest. We have the Oscar-winning producer of Summer of Soul, Joseph Patel, a person I've known for quite a while, and a person, if you are a hip hop head, if you're a fan of hip hop media or media in general, you probably have seen his work. This is one of the founders of Soul Sides, the Northern California hip hop label. This is also the person who did MTV News' My Block, a pivotal series that brought MTV News into local scenes before that was even a thing to do. But more recently, as I mentioned, Joseph is the man who produced Summer of Soul with Questlove. And now we're here to talk about his latest film with Questlove, Sly Lives, The Burden of Black Genius. How's it going?
AKA the burden of black genius.
AKA The Burden of Black Genius. That the AKA I lost. I lost in the parentheses, but yes. So how you doing, man? How are things?
I'm good, man. It's really nice to talk to you. It's nice to talk to Okayplayer. I feel like I spent many hours of my life on Okayplayer's message boards back in the day.
What kind of message board person were you? What kind of personality did you have? Were you an arguer? Were you a lurker? Were
I
you a
was
poster
bo-
of new music?
I was never a poster of new music. Um, I was like a know-it-all, and so I was like a lurker slash know-it-all. Occasionally would get argumentative, which is like just being immature on the internet.
Sounds like a hip hop writer to me.
I used to get into a lot of online fights, and now I look back on it, and I'm just like, that was so stupid. So, but it's great to be here.
Um, I saw a screener of the film. We are recording this before its worldwide debut on Hulu on February 13th. I saw a screener of the film and I was blown away. Um, there's so much I want to ask about, but maybe the first question I want to ask you is, what does Black Genius mean to you?
Um, it doesn't matter what it means to me.
Mm,
Um, it's I think the idea of black genius to me it means the genius of black folk.
hmm
And I think that that is a very specific type of genius that has to navigate what it's like to live in this country,
hmm
in America, right? Historically. But that was really Amir's question to ask. And his question to ask is there a burden on black genius? Um, I am as a producer who both knows the nuts and bolts and the creative and story, I'm in service to Amir's bigger idea.
hmm
And, very early on in the process of us talking about the Sly and the Family Stone documentary was how do we want to tell this story? And I think where me, Amir, and our editor Josh Pearson align, and then we brought in Jeff Mao as our story producer for this film. Where we align, I think it was reflected in Summer of Soul. I think it's reflected in this movie. Is how do you tell a specific story that is also about something bigger?
hmm
And I think my first conversation with Amir in attacking this material was what's the specific story? It's going to be about Sly Stone, but what's the bigger idea we're that we're laddering up to? And that was something I think Amir has been harboring for a long time. This idea that if you are a black artist in America, a successful black artist, that there is a struggle that comes with success,
Yep.
and it's filled with survivor's guilt and anxiety and shame and other feelings. And how he knows that is because he went through it himself. He still
hmm
goes through it sometimes. And he looked around at his peers and his friends and his bandmates and his other people that he's collaborated with, and he saw them going through it. And how that guilt and anxiety and shame manifests sometimes is in self sabotage.
Hmm.
And again, Amir, I think he said in interviews previously that for him it was food and this crutch that he had.
hmm
Um, For other people, it's drugs. For other people, it's alcohol. You know, Solange sang about this in Cranes in the Sky. For her, you know, it was all the whole
Tried to
list of
drink it
things,
away.
right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I think that he saw that in his peers, and he one, I think, wanted to make something that talked about that, but two, and how it relates to Sly is that when he traced that back through the generations, he sort of saw Sly as one of the first artists in his lifetime who really went through that specific struggle. A crossover black artist serving white audiences, serving black audiences, and how do you navigate that?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what our film is. That really, in that first meeting, Ahmir and I had to talk about the movie. We talked about wanting to tell Sly's story with a lot of empathy, but also reaching for this bigger idea, which was that there is a burden that comes with success for black artists in America.
You know, thinking about you contextualizing the movie like that, and then me watching the movie and observing some of the people you cast to talk to who could speak to what you just described from firsthand experience and maybe didn't get the opportunity to speak to those things in other media, other platforms. So, for instance, one of the people that come to mind is D'Angelo. Hearing D'Angelo, a man who is reclusive, an artist who has all this mystery and some controversy around him, um, who receded from the limelight, right? Talk about Sly Stone in such a knowing way, having lived the experience himself, like blew my mind. You talk to Andre 3000, another person who, you know, shrieked away from the limelight and fell back into themselves. You talk to Shaka Khan. When we talk about people who had huge impact, made huge hits, but then were dragged through the mud in the media with without a lot of empathy, perfect for that. Tell me about the casting of folks you spoke to for the film and what was your intention?
Yeah, I will say that everybody in the film is there for a reason. Everybody that we went reached out to is super intentional why they're in the film and why other people are not, right? There's no music journalists in this film, right? There's nobody. The people we wanted to, what we wanted to do was talk about Sly's genius, but not only say how great it was and how great he was, but really break it down for you. Well, who better to do that than Jimmy Jam, Terry Lewis, Nile Rodgers? We wanted to give you a look into what it felt like to run around with Sly. So who better to do that than George
George
Clinton and
Clinton.
Shaka Khan, right?
Yeah.
Shaka's got the added layer that she was a Black Panther when she was a teenager and she was at the Chicago riot show.
Mm-hmm.
Niles got the added layer. Not only is he one of the greatest hit makers of our lifetimes, he knows how hard it is to write a pop song and a hit song, but he was a Black Panther youth section leader for the Harlem chapter of the Black Panthers. And you know, when he told us about listening to Stand over and over and over
Mm-hmm.
again, it was like, okay, I believe everything you say about this. um, you know, ideal scenario, we could talk to Sly and ask him to be reflective about those moments in his career and his life where maybe he felt too anxious to go on stage, or ask him why he was late, or ask him about drug addiction. But one, he's not healthy enough to be on camera. We didn't want to put him out there. You know, again, if we're going to tell his story with empathy, we have to show him empathy.
Mm-hmm.
He can't form full sentences. He's 81 years old. It just didn't feel right.
Mm-hmm.
He's still lucid and he still, you know, spends a lot of time with his family, but he deserves that. We weren't going to put him out on camera. Um, but we could talk to D'Angelo, who's been through similar things. And we could talk to Andre, who's been through similar things. And we could talk to Q-Tip, who's been through similar things.
Mm-hmm.
We could talk to Dream Hampton as a filmmaker, has been through similar things. And has really observed a lot of these artists up close
Mm-hmm.
and personal in her personal life. We could talk to Shaka Khan, and so that was our intent. Was like D'Angelo's talking about Sly because he's obviously been influenced by Sly and he knows how to break that stuff down, but he's also really talking about himself.
Himself. Yep.
And I think those voices in the film, if you don't know who they are, or just cursory know who they are, it still works, right? It's still, you still hear about these people who are talking about breaking down Sly's music and also talking about like the struggles of fame.
Hmm.
But if you know D'Angelo's backstory, and you know that when he was on tour for Voodoo, it was really hard for him to make it out on stage on time because he was crippled by the fact that he had to come out on stage every night and take off his shirt and do How Does It Feel?
And be consumed. Yeah.
And be consumed by the audience and
Hmm.
screaming throngs of women. And Ahmir was in the driver's seat or in the passenger seat for that whole experience. He saw this firsthand. Andre is interesting because he took a different path. Everyone wants Andre to rap, and he doesn't want to rap anymore. And
Yeah.
how that must feel. He's like, look, I could rap for you, and my heart's not in it, and that might I might get consumed by something else.
Hmm. Hmm.
So I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go play the flute. You can't find me.
Hmm.
And so, he has the benefit of having seen other people take the others road and really sabotage themselves. And he says, I'm not going to do that. So everybody in that movie, it's very intentional who we spoke to. We really wanted people to understand not just that Sly was a genius, but how he was a genius. So the next time you hear Dance to the Music, you're going to hear harmony and unison. And you're going to understand, okay, unison brings the everybody into the song because they can sing along with it on the radio, but harmony makes me feel like church. And um, you're gonna listen to a song like Everyday People, excuse me, and understand that this idea that this song is for everybody was actually engineered to be like that.
Hmm.
Not just the lyrics, but the way the song is constructed. So I think that, you know, on the surface, this is a very long answer to your question, but hopefully you're okay with.
I'm
On
here
the
for it though.
surface, Sly's story is very conventional. It's sort of a conventional rock and roll story, right? It's the rise and the fall,
Hmm.
but I think we treat it with a lot of empathy, to sort of explain away his slow decline, but also to give him agency, right? It was his choices that allowed this to happen. He says at the very last clip of the film where he's like, "We deserve what we get in this life." Like he
Mm.
knows, but also, we wanted to break down for people what made Sly a genius. We also wanted to add this extra layer about the commentary as it ladders up into this bigger story about the burden of black genius.
I can't remember who it is that says this in the film. It might be D'Angelo, but he talks about Sly and he talks about black artists and he compares them to white rock stars. And he says something to the effect of like, hey, you look at the Rolling Stones and like Keith Richards is around and Mick Jagger is around and they did all the crazy shit, but they can be surrounded by like their family and they can still tour and all this other stuff. Um,
It
and
is D'Angelo, and he doesn't actually name names, but he says these white rock and rollers, they've got generational wealth, and
Mhm.
their families are taken care of, and they can die in their tomato garden like the Godfather, playing with their grandkids.
The way that struck me in the heart and got to the crux of the difference in experiences for artists based on race in like this racialized society, like I almost like it was such a profound moment.
That
Um,
that 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 was very profound for us when he said that. It also pairs really nicely with the Q-tip comparison when he says David Bowie was allowed to go through these changes, these chameleon-like changes, and Sly was not. And then the back half, because that's such an AB, right?
mhm,
They're around at the same time, and David Bowie creates a new persona, and everyone's like, genius! What a what a creative genius! Slide goes a little bit to the left, and they're like, pimp's wisdom. You're just like, what? House N word for the
mhm,
Woodstock generation is like, who do you think you are
mhm.
talking about a man like
To
that?
judge this man in this way, yeah.
And then
Um,
and then the back half of that Q-tip bite is really interesting. he says something to me that's really revealing, and I didn't really catch how deep it was until like the second or third time we went through it. But he says, if you're a black artist and you're doing some creative experimental stuff and people react this way, it may fuck with you.
Mm-hmm.
And I just thought about Q-Tip and his career and like the Kamal the Abstract album that came out
Mm-hmm.
and it never got released because people were like, "What the
People were
fuck
not
is
ready.
this?"
What is this? Yeah.
And I just was, and to me that really struck at the heart of the movie, which was not just for Sly, but also for subsequent black artists ever since. Not everybody, obviously, for mostly though, for a lot of them, it's this idea that you don't have the space to be normal, to be as curious as anybody else is, as experimental as anybody else might want you to be. But like black artists aren't given that grace and that space. And I think that's really Amir's point, right? When he was talking about this bigger idea, it really is that point, which is like, he just wants Amir has this theory, and I think he's correct, which is if you're a black artist in America, you have to be superhuman or you're not seen as human at all. And he's like, I just want to be human.
I think even being put on that pedestal of superhumanity is dehumanizing in itself because of the standards that come with it, you know?
And
Because of the
that's exactly
expectations.
I think
Yeah.
that is exactly you just summarized it in a very more succinct way than I did, which is I think that's it. It's like the burden of black genius is that you are looked at as superhuman and that is dehumanizing.
Hmm. We're having this conversation about the themes in this film, and you mentioned, a thing I hadn't even really noticed until you mentioned it, that there are no journalists as talking heads. And usually when there's a music documentary, there's journalists as talking heads to provide context from this kind of like, journalistic, whatever. But from watching the film, there's definitely a journalist touch in the approach. And I saw that in you, and I saw that in what Quest has developed into. Like I listen to QLS, Questlove Supreme, and the way he asks questions and his curiosity. And then, of course, you're a person who came from, telling stories on paper and on screens to telling them on bigger screens, right? Tell me about how you applied kind of like your journalistic chops to this. And also, like, shout out Chairman Mao for being a part of this as well, because that's another person with amazing chops as a hip hop journalist, a music journalist who's applying it to story in this respect.
Yeah, I mean, I brought Mao in because one of the things that he and I bond over is the rigor of the work,
Hmm.
right? Like, I really like the work. And also, Mao is, like me, like the opportunity that was given to me many years ago to go into different types of storytelling, it changed my life. And so I like giving that opportunity to others who I recognize that they have the chops for it. And so
Hmm.
Mao has the chops for it. And so I brought him in the fold, and he really added a different dimension to this film. He the which to answer your question is our journalistic approach is, we research, we report, we fact check. Um, we try to see where we can maybe take some liberties in terms of the storytelling. Um, we are talking about a story that is 55 years in the past,
Mm.
right? So it's like, and we did this with Summer of Soul. Like again, that was something where we knew the festival existed. We had this footage, but we didn't have anything else. So everything in that film is reported.
Hmm.
We had to go through tapes to decipher what weekends these took place. These concerts took place. We had to figure out what order everyone was in. We had to check the documents that we had against the tapes and the actual footage. I had to, there weren't any like detailed camera plot plans, so like
You
we
have to
had
get
to.
forensic with
We
it.
did, and it took a while, and so like, and finding people who went to the concert, that was like boots on the ground reporting, like flyering social clubs and churches and record stores, and had a list of 150 people and calling every single one of them to see what their story was. Like that was real reporting. So that's the journalism practice in the Sly doc. It was, you know, thankfully there's a lot. We had the opposite problem. There's too much information,
Hmm.
right? It's like there's fantastic oral history about Sly, written by Joel Selvin in out of San Francisco. But he has a particular perspective. Like his oral history paints Sly as a really bad dude, and he reports on a lot of drama and resentment and stuff that was maybe more emotionally fresh for everybody in the early '90s when he wrote that book. There's a series of like fan service docs that have been made, but all by older, sort of certain type of white rock dude, right? And
I
so,
laugh because I know exactly what you mean.
yeah, and it's like it's fine, but Sly holds a certain place for that for a generation of rock fans.
Yeah.
This movie is different because it is told from a black perspective. It is also told from a black artist perspective. And that is something, I think when you author a story in whatever form, knowing what your perspective is, what your lens is for your storytelling is really important. Knowing who your audience is really important. We really envision who our audience is before we even set out to make the thing. It really helps us clarify how nerdy to get and how superficial to
Mm-hmm.
get. Like,
Mm-hmm.
um, but yeah, I think those chops as journalists, and really Amir is an aspiring journalist. He's been one since he was a kid, an
Mm-hmm.
aspiring music journalist. It all fits very nicely. The one thing I'll say that I love about Amir that makes him different and I think makes him suited for this type of work is that he's constantly on a quest for knowledge.
No pun intended.
No, no pun intended, or pun actually intended probably. But he's not a gatekeeper. Like when he discovers something new, it's in the text thread. It's in our group chat. It's
Mm-hmm.
like he's talking about it on his podcast, or he makes a movie about it. Like he's very much like, oh, I learned this new cool thing. I need to share this with people.
Mm-hmm.
And so it is, one of the things I really appreciate about collaborating with him.
I do want to speak more to that so the more to that relationship and the little bit of time we have left.
Listen, I will say this: I have as much time for you as you need.
Hey, that makes me feel good.
Yeah,
Appreciate
you're the homie, so I got you for however long you need. Sorry, Emily, you're gonna have to hang out for a little longer.
that. Let's talk about you guys' working relationship and the roles you play as producer and director. And I believe you're also unit director or
I'm a second unit director,
yeah, second unit
technically.
director on it. Now, for those folks who aren't familiar with all the roles that filmmakers have to play, or filmmakers, in general do, tell us about the interplay between you folks, you yourself and Amir, and how that came into play for this film.
Um, yeah, I mean, I should say we have a sort of non-traditional working dynamic.
Because you kind
Um,
of both play both of those roles, from what I see.
yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
like I do some of the things a director should do, and Amir does some of the things a producer should do. So
Hmm.
it really is collaborative, right? But really, these are Amir's stories to tell, right? Like Summer of Soul is not a story that I should be telling.
Why
That
do you
was
say
the
that?
I mean, it's about a black music festival in Harlem in 1969, and Amir had a very strong viewpoint about wanting to people to know Black history was American history. That's the viewpoint of the movie.
Hmm.
That's not mine. That's not my story to tell,
Hmm.
right? So my job is to help him tell it. Sly, I could have done a Sly and the Family Stone documentary, but this idea of the burden of Black genius, that's not my story to tell. That's Amir's story to tell. And what I love about Amir is that he has these big, ambitious ideas. And like I said, where we find common ground, and I think what makes our films good, and I do think they are good, is that, and what makes them unlike other music documentaries is that it is about it's a specific story about a bigger idea, right?
Hmm.
Those bigger ideas come from Amir. So my job is to help us tell that story, both specific and big. And but Amir is not there day to day like a normal director would be because of all the other things he has going on. So the way we work is I think what makes me a good producer is that I know the nuts and bolts, right? I know how to stay on budget. I know how to make budget decisions. If we spend more here, we have less here. What does that mean for us? I know the technical aspects of it, right? Why this camera? Why this lens? What I do is I ask Ahmir, I said, what do you want people to feel when they see this? I'll take the interviews for an example. He's like, I want them to talk directly to camera. I don't want them to be looking like they're talking to
I was
someone
going to
off
ask you about
camera,
this. I was going to ask you
right?
about this.
And he's
Yes.
like, I want it to feel like they're sitting at a table across from you. So
Like,
that's what we
yeah.
did. They're looking at an Interatron, a mirror on the other side of it. We had a very tight private set because we knew we were going to be talking about some sensitive things. So the set
Mhm.
was closed, but the subject couldn't see anybody. They're just see the Interatron with the mirror's face on it from behind the curtain. No one else is in their view. There's nobody walking around so they feel self-conscious about what they're saying.
It's almost like a confessional.
It's like a confessional.
Hmm.
And there's a table there, which you never see, right? The table's there because we literally want the viewer to feel like they're sitting across the table from Jimmy Jam hearing about this. Um, and so he can give me the idea and what he wants people to feel, and it's my job as a producer to build that and what the technical things are. Our DP, Laura Marians, is insanely intelligent and talented, and so she helped us build that look. Um, but the other part of me, I think, which makes me a really good producer, is I'm a really good creative producer. I know story.
Hmm.
I know how to construct a story on a large narrative arc with 3 acts and how to tease something and pay off later. But I also know, minute by minute how to build a story together. So a lot of this collaboration with the mirror is, again, he has the big idea. He can tell me what he wants people to feel, and then I figure out how to build that. Um, but part of the collaboration too is our editor, Josh Pearson, who's brilliant genius, and he doesn't know a lot about this subject matter, which is really good. It's to our advantage because if it's
Fresh
interesting to
pair of
him,
eyes and ears.
yeah, if it's
Curiosity comes with that. Yeah.
exactly, and if it's interesting to him, then it's going to be interesting to our viewer, who is also not coming to the story with fluency like that.
There's a riot going on album cover. That red, black, and white flag inspired the Stankonia album cover. To wrap that flag around you is interesting when you see a black person do it because our version of America is different from the rest of the world's view of America. We're in an America, but then we're in a black America too. We're in two different realities.
Um, so all of that is by design, right? And one of the things that we did in this film, the Sly film, which not a lot of people will ever get, like 3 people maybe will ever get it, but maybe not even that much, but it's
Mm.
there, is, and again, this was just a conversation with Amir where we were talking about Riot and how influential that was and the red and the dark blue black of the flag. And the people against the red backdrop in the film are blood, Sly blood.
Relatives.
They're either blood or banned. The people against the blue background are people who were one generation removed from Sly but directly influenced by his music. Right? So Shaka Khan, George Clinton, Nile Rodgers, Jimmy, Terry. That
Hmm.
red and that blue, and I know we're coming off the Super Bowl halftime show and there's a lot of discourse around the American flag. I appreciate your upside down American flag on your sweatshirt, but like the riot cover is this dark blue, black, red, and white flag. And so that was our backdrop sort of dichotomy. The proxies for Sly, the people who are answering questions that we wish we could have asked Sly, are in situ. D'Angelo and Q-Tip at the studio, Andre at his house in Venice, Dreamhampton at a studio. They are our Sly proxies, answering
Mm.
questions as if we were talking to a very lucid, very reflective 80-year-old Sly. No one's going to get that, right? And they it's not so strict like that because Shaka talks about, Shaka answers questions that Sly would have answered. D'Angelo talks about music the way Nile and Jimmy do, so it's not strict, but generally our buckets were like those 3 buckets. Someone like Mark Anthony Neal, who's the closest person to a music journalist in the film, the reason we chose Mark is because Mark's written novels about this music,
Mm.
not just nonfiction books, but novels
Novels. Yeah.
about soul music and how it makes you feel in a certain generation. So he was a really good person in his books. He really paints good context. And I loved having him as a part of the film because he can serve as that person who's like, Sly's parents are part of the Great Migration. And
Mm-hmm.
so, and Sly's generation is different than those parents in that he sees optimism in the American dream.
Mm-hmm.
Sly really, truly, as a teenager, is an all lives matter dude.
Mm-hmm.
And so Mark can give us that context without it sounding academic.
Man. I love that you just kind of gave us like almost the legend for this map that is that is the film. That this piece will be able to accompany after people watch or even before people watch it. Um, I always want to ask people who accomplish huge endeavors like this, what was the most difficult part of this process? Because I know you, I know like this has been a labor of love and focus. There's probably more gray in that beard because of this. Tell me a little bit about what was the most difficult thing to do with this film.
Um, I think for me, the most difficult part of the film making process on this one is that Amir and I didn't start at the same starting point, right?
How's
Summer of
that?
Soul. Well, Summer of Soul, we both started at the same starting point. We knew this festival existed. We knew we had this footage. We didn't know anything else, right? So we're both coming to it from the same place. With Sly, it was different. Sly has been an artist that was really made an impact and impression on Amir at a young age. He's fluent in Sly's story. He's fluent in the music. I just knew the hits. I knew some of the deep cuts that were sampled. I enjoyed the music, but with no context. I couldn't tell you. I couldn't tell you if you said what came first, Fresh or Stand. I couldn't answer that 3 years ago.
That is really interesting to me because I assumed you being a child of Northern California that you were all in on Sly.
I mean, I knew the music, but for me, it was really Parliament Funkadelic. That's what my first sort of like black funk obsession was.
Hmm.
And then I went into jazz stuff, and it just got taken left, right? So I missed. I knew Sly's music, like at a 6 level, maybe a 5 or 6 level, not anything deeper. I wasn't obsessed. It wasn't one of my obsessions, and like Funkadelic and Parliament were. Um, but yeah, I couldn't tell you. I did so. One of the biggest challenges for me is before we even started this film, while we were promoting Summer of Soul, I just dove in as deep as I could to have some sort of fluency in the story.
Hmm.
I listened to all the music in order, sort of started to memorize when albums came out, what the personnel was on the albums, and started reading some of the oral histories and some of the other books and some of the other articles. And just to get to a point where I could talk to Amir about story with some fluency.
Mm.
And that was really hard for me because it was like, it was a different experience than our last film, and it was also, Amir knows a lot, and it's very intimidating.
It
And he,
does, yeah.
you know, I remember he was like, well, this person played with Sly, and they spun off into a group called Little Sister that was from Oakland, and I was like, oh my God, I'm not there yet. Um,
Yeah, between him and Fonte.
yeah,
Intimidating music nerds, yes.
yeah, and I think that so that was really hard for me. I think the biggest challenge for us as a filmmaking team was how do you fit 55 years of story into 2 hours, right? How do you tell this man's story and all the nuances and reverence it deserves and fit it in 2 hours? And you can't, and I think that was something we realized is like this should be a series,
Hmm.
right? I bet you if this were a Bob Dylan doc, it'd be a
Hmm.
series, right? This is kind of an unspoken subtext of the film is what do we give our black artists? How do we hold them high?
Hmm.
Very thankful that this is a feature doc. Very thankful that Onyx Collective trusted us enough to pick up this film before we even started on it. That Hulu and Disney Plus are giving us a platform. Glad this story is being put out into the world and we get to tell it. But there's a lot of story still left on the ground that hopefully someone else will tell. this what we realized when you're faced with with a daunting task of telling 55 years in 2 hours, you realize not everything's going to make it in, and so what you realize is you're telling a story, not the story. So this is a story about Sly Stone from a black artist perspective that ladders up in this bigger idea about the burden of black genius. I hope someone who watches this on Thursday and doesn't hear their favorite song in the movie isn't like, well, they didn't put Just Like a Baby, or, actually, we do have Just Like a Baby in there, but they didn't put Thankful and Thoughtful in there. And it's like, we couldn't, you know?
Mm-hmm. A story, not the story. Um, I've worked on my own, documentary kind of endeavors. Shout out to It's the Real, Jeff and Eric. We worked on the blog era together. I was a story editor on that. And, they had amassed all of this material, like literally like 300 hours of interviews. And we're looking at what the stories are, and they want to tell all the stories because they feel this pressure that it has to be the definitive document. And one of the things I told them is like, this is not the story. This is a story. And we're going to leave it open enough that if other people have other stories from other perspectives, they can tell those too. Add on. It's not
Add
like
on, yeah. That's
this is
it.
not the end of the archive. You feel
Yeah.
me? Like
Yeah.
add on to this. So if someone sees this Sly film is like they didn't talk about, then the lane is open for them to expand and add on to the conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say this because it's you. And Emily, I'm sorry in advance. Um, you'll notice there's no new interviews with Freddie Stone or Rose Stone in this film, even though they are still with us.
Yeah.
And Freddie did not want to participate in this documentary. He felt there's some weird resentments that still exist there in that group dynamic. Um, and I think we were like, cool, like we're not doing the definitive Sly Stone documentary, but we do feel like we want to talk to you. And so to some extent, this film originally was outlined to be more about Sly and the Family Stone,
Mm.
and it had a little bit more broader storytelling around the band itself. But when, we didn't have Freddie and Rose, it forced us to focus more on just Sly and his journey. Because we wanted to give some dap to the rest of the group,
Yeah.
and we had a whole section about Freddie's guitar playing, and Jimmy breaks it down about how his rhythm guitar playing is really the blueprint for Prince's entire catalog. And we couldn't do that because it's just, again, how do you fit this in 2 hours? And so you're whittling away, like the D'Angelo line we talked about at the beginning of the interview about white rock and rollers on stage, generational wealth taken care of. The other half of that bite, which we really wanted to keep in there but had to cut for time,
Mm.
is he says, well, meanwhile, you've got 65-year-old black artists shaking their ass on stage at Essence Fest in July. And it's such a contrast. But we had to sort of cut it for time and realize that. And one of the things you learn in filmmaking is you cut it, and then if you don't miss it, you leave it on the floor.
Mm-hmm.
But if the point gets across, and we felt like the point got across, but little gems like that, I wish this could be 4 hours, right? But that being said, I think one of the things I'm proud of with Sly film, and also Summer of Soul, there's a lot of stuff that didn't make it into Summer of Soul, but we feel like it's a great movie. There's nothing missing from Sly that will make you feel like, oh, that they didn't talk about that. Like, we hit all the notes.
Um, I think for me, we speak to the point about humanization. I like that you talk to his family and like his children specifically, and that they gave honest reflections. Um, One thing that's come more into focus for me as I have gotten older is that the complicated relationships we have with our loved ones, um, they become more gray than black and white. So, the daughter talking about the chalk incident. I don't want to blow it up for people who haven't watched it
Oh,
yet.
it's so
Like
good.
that could be some mortifying, for lack of a
I
better
mean,
term. but the way she
Fun.
remembers it,
Yeah, and it's funny because so her name is Fun. She's the only daughter of Cynthia Robinson and Sly Stone. Um, First of all, she's great on camera.
hmm
She is so good on camera. In fact, I need to call her and tell her that she should be doing voiceover work or acting work or commercial work. Like she's great. Um, the children, though, to us, when we talk about Sly just being a normal human, Novina's and Ahmir talks about black folks, black artists specifically, just being allowed to be human. When we interviewed Novina, and we tease her in the film, and when you see her in the second act, she's talking about music, and we identify her as a DJ at KCRW. Morning
hmm
becomes eclectic. But when you see her in Act Three and she's talking about her father, we identify her as the daughter of Sly Stone.
They got the same face.
Yeah, they
Yeah.
do have the same face, and
hmm
she's got the smile, right?
hmm
And Novena talks about her father liking pizza with all the toppings, westerns, and cars. She's like he's like a standard old black man.
hmm
And the fact that that is how she knows him and remembers him and loves him and thinks about him every day. And when she gets to go see him when she goes to see him on the weekends, every weekend, like that's the point, right? She sees him and we present him as human. And I think, you know, the kids have every reason to hate their father. He was a drug addict, he wasn't there, he didn't have great relationships with their mothers, manipulative in certain instances. But they adore him. And I think speaks a lot. That speaks volumes without us having to say it about his charm and his charisma, and also just the empathy they have for him.
Yeah.
You know,
hmm I think part of maturity is learning empathy. If you're blessed.
if you're blessed enough, yeah,
um, with that said, I do want to say thank you for spending the time with me to talk through this film, giving me all these insights into its creation, how you thought about it. And I do want to thank you and Amir for humanizing Black artists. We spoke a little bit about past work, biographical work that's been done on Sly. There's a lot of biographical work that's been done on some of these, Black icons. Not enough of it is humanizing and understanding their different nuances, the pressures that are on them, and how they dealt with the world. So thank you for that.
yeah. No, I mean, I appreciate those words, and I'll pass them on to Amir too. I think I've known Amir for a very long time. I met him in 1996.
Oh shit. Okay.
And we met when I was doing a cover story on the Roots for Rap Pages magazine, and my editor was Dream Hampton. I mean,
Full circle. Wow.
full circle moment.
hmm
And Amir's own journey that I've witnessed in the last 10 years, his growth journey, especially after Rich passed, Rich Nichols, his
Yep.
manager. And as they've gotten older, like I've just witnessed his own mental growth, mental health growth. And it's really important for him to pass that along to his fellow artists. There are
Mm.
two artists in particular we wanted to speak to as proxies, and they both canceled a day. One canceled on the day of, one canceled the night before.
Mm.
And this is after the interviews had been set up, and you know, they were like, when we booked them, they were like, well, I don't know a lot about Sly. And we're like, well, it's not really about Sly. It's going to be about this thing that Sly went through that we know that you also have gone through. And as a producer, I was very upset, right? We,
Yeah.
we, we've lost money. That we've booked the crew, we booked the location, we changed hotels and flights for one person, one of the artists in particular, and canceling day of, we lose all that money. There's no kill fee unless your crew is really down for you. Um, and so I'm like a little upset. I'm just upset at like who does that? Like who cancels day of? And Amir incredibly was not upset. He
Mm.
was very like zen about it because he's like, look, they're self-sabotaging themselves. They are behaving in exactly the way that we are trying to expose and help fix. That's not something Ahmir from 5 years ago would have said. That's not something Ahmir from 10 years ago would have said. And I think that that is, it's really cool for me to work with one of my musical heroes and to collaborate with him at this level. But more importantly, I'm really just happy at how much my friend has grown.
That's dope. I think we're gonna end on that note. Um, I love that you guys have a friendship and a working relationship that produces such great results, and that reflects both of your approaches to appreciating art and appreciating people.
He's still a pain in the ass. Let me be
I'm
clear
sure,
about that. He's still
but
a pain
I'm
in the
sure
ass.
he'd say the same of you.
Yeah. Also, you
Ladies,
asked me on text about my favorite Sly flip.
I was gonna do that in a different segment, but fuck it, let's do it right now.
it's MOP. It's G building. It's like
Let's talk about that. Let's talk about that. So for those who don't know, and OK Player is gonna publish this playlist as well. I did a playlist called Sly Lives through samples that encompass some of the best flips of Sly Stone samples that I've ever heard, right? And I think an important part of the movie is talking about how Sly's music lives on through hip hop sampling, getting a person like Q-Tip to talk about how powerful the break was that he had to sample it and how it became relevant even past people knowing Sly's story. So we did this. I did this playlist. It's a bunch of songs on it that from Queen Latifah's "Dance for Me" to De La Soul's "Say No and Go," Tribe Called Quest "After Hours." And my question to Joseph Patel was, what is your favorite flip of a Sly Stone sample?
for me, it's MOP G building. Like it's to me that is it's a sample of "Don't Call Me N Word Whitey,"
Mm-hmm.
but it just I don't even know who produced it. Was that like early
Fizzy
Just
Womack.
really?
Fizzy Womack, aka Lil Fame, produced that.
It's so good. It's like it just chops that song up to its punch and then loops it so it's like this bluesy funk
The
joint.
organs on it,
It
incredible.
sounds like proto Just Blaze.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like the way Just Blaze could create those bigger than life anthems out of these sounds, bluesy sounds. That to me was always my favorite flip. But and we have this scene in the movie, which is the "Thank You for Let Me Be Myself" chop into Rhythm Nation by Janet Jackson.
Blew my
That's my
mind because I didn't even know that
it's
until I
my
was telling
favorite
you.
scene in the movie, and it's my favorite scene for a lot of reasons. One is that if you knew that Rhythm Nation from Janet Jackson sampled "Thank You for Let Me Be Myself," just hearing the story unfold in front of you, how it happened, is remarkable. If you didn't know, it blows your mind. But I love that scene in the movie because it exposes, like when I talk about intention, we were very intentional. Uh, Amir actually had the very inspired idea of interviewing Jimmy and Terry separately, right? I'm like, let's interview them together. We're going to save a shoot day. And
Mm-hmm.
he's like, no, you got to talk to them separately. Because when you interview them together, Jimmy will do all the talking. Terry won't say anything. And he's like, I've talked to Terry and he's loaded with knowledge.
Mm.
So we interviewed him 2 weeks apart. And sure enough, Terry is just has the gift of gab. And he is in this movie a lot because of his insight. But those two separately told us the same story.
Mm.
And they both pointed to "Thank You," and they both told the story of how they discovered it. And they mentioned the same sort of story beats that our editor, Josh Pearson, who's a fucking genius again, is able to cut back and forth and tell that story. Why I also love that scene is because from the moment "Thank You" starts playing when they're on the Andy Williams show to when the story ends on the Dick Cavett show, the entire song is in time.
That's hard.
So when
Yeah.
when they go to the rest when Jimmy talks about the restaurant, you hear it sort of on the AM restaurant
Mm-hmm.
speakers to when he talks about cutting up that song and doing it in the sampler and Larry talking about it popping on the bass and Terry saying, it's got that riff. All of that is in time. And that's because Josh, our editor, is a musician, and it's sort of a flex to put it all in time. The beat never breaks. And then I also love that scene because as they're finishing Thank You and getting off the stage on Dick Cavett, it then flips to Vernon Reid talking about Sly on the couch at a white talk show where the host always thinks he's got the upper hand and he's the smartest guy in the room, and Sly just pulls the rug out from underneath him. And Vernon breaks that whole scene down. And again, if you don't know who Vernon Reid is, the scene still works. But if you do know who Vernon Reid is, and you do know that he was in a black rock band,
Mm-hmm.
and you do know that he himself has sat on that same couch in a different context and felt that same gaze
Mm-hmm.
of people trying to critique his rock bona fides because he's a black guitarist, then that scene hits a little deeper for you. And so that to me, front to back, that scene is my favorite. And to me, I say this with a lot of humility, and I don't like to do this a lot, Tim, but like nobody can with us. That scene shows me I've watched a lot of music docs. Nobody can with us.
I love it. I love it. And I love the candor. Um, ladies, gentlemen, people everywhere, Joseph Patel, producer of Sly Lives, aka The Burden of Black Genius. Thank you.
Thank you.
And we out.